What do you think you're doing? Detective Marcus Chen's voice cut through the briefing room like a blade. He was 28 years old, top of his class at Quantico, and currently the lead investigator on the biggest case the Riverside Police Academy had seen in a decade. He stood at the head of a polished conference table, surrounded by screens displaying crime scene photos, maps, and digital forensics data. But his attention wasn't on any of that. It was locked on the old man standing quietly near the back wall, holding a worn yellow mop in one hand and a tattered notebook in the other. The old man, dressed in the academy's standard gray maintenance uniform, didn't flinch. His name was Thomas Mercer. He was 71 years old, and for the past 5 years he had been the academy's night custodian. His hair was white, his hands weathered by time, and his shoulders slightly stooped. To everyone in the room, he was invisible, just part of the furniture, like the coffee machine or the bulletin board. I said, "What are you doing?" Chen repeated, his tone sharper now. The other detectives, 4 young men and women in their 20s and 30s, turned to look. A few smirked. One rolled his eyes. Thomas held up the notebook. "I've been following your case," he said quietly. His voice was calm, almost apologetic. "I think I might have found something." The room erupted in barely suppressed laughter. Chen's partner, Detective Sarah Kim, stepped forward. Sarah was 31, ambitious and hungry to prove herself by cracking this case. "Thomas," she said, her voice laced with impatience, though she tried to maintain a veneer of politeness. "We're in the middle of an active investigation briefing. This is an official meeting. Cleaning can wait." "This isn't about cleaning," Thomas replied. His eyes drifted to the whiteboard, focusing on the crime map displayed there. "It's about your theory. I think you're missing something." Silence, then a low chuckle, then another. Then the room filled with laughter. Chen slammed his fist on the table. "Enough!" he barked, though the laughter slowly subsided. Then he turned to Thomas, his eyes narrowed and dangerous. "What are you doing here? This is a restricted area, active investigation. You're just a janitor." "I know," Thomas said calmly, "but I'm here every night. After you all leave, I stay. I see your boards, your files, your photographs, and old habits die hard. I analyze." Chen's face flushed red. "Old habits? What habits? You watch cop shows on TV?" The young detectives in the room laughed again, but this time the laughter was harder, more derisive. Thomas Mercer's expression didn't change. There was only a deep weariness in his eyes, the weight of long years. "No," he said quietly, "but I worked for the FBI for 25 years, Behavioral Analysis Unit." The room went suddenly, profoundly silent, a deep, heavy, shocked silence. Everyone froze. Chen raised his eyebrows, then shook his head and laughed cruelly. Sure you did. And I'm a secret advisor to the president." He looked around at the young detectives. "This man is delusional. Someone get him out of here." A young detective, Ryan Foster, with a military bearing, stood up. He was grinning, but his eyes were hard. "Come on, Gramps," he said, grabbing Thomas by the arm. "Briefing's over for you. Let's go. Grab your mop and leave." Thomas didn't resist. He just placed his notebook on the table, slowly, deliberately, and let Foster guide him toward the door. Before reaching the door, he looked back over his shoulder. "All your victims were killed on weekends," he said, his voice still calm. "But they were all abducted on Friday nights, found on Monday mornings. The unsub is holding them somewhere, in a controlled environment, and before he kills them, he talks to them, at length. This isn't a power play. This is an attempt to communicate." Foster shoved him. "Enough, old man. Story time is over." The door closed behind Thomas. The room was silent. Then Chen snorted. "That was the funniest thing I've seen all week," he said with a mocking laugh. "All right, where were we?" But no one noticed that Sarah Kim's expression had changed. Her brows were furrowed. What the old man had said, it had triggered something in her mind. Late that night, Sarah Kim couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Thomas Mercer's words over and over in her mind. All your victims were killed on weekends, but they were all abducted on Friday nights. Was that true? She ran through the files in her head. The first victim, Emily Sanders, 24-year-old nurse. She had disappeared on a Friday night while walking home from her shift. Her body was found Monday morning in a wooded area. The second victim, David Cho, 29-year-old teacher. He left the gym on Friday evening, found Monday morning in an abandoned warehouse. The third victim, the fourth victim, all the same timing, disappeared. Friday night, found Monday morning. Sarah bolted upright, grabbed her laptop, and began reviewing the case files. It was 3 a.m, but sleep was impossible now. The old janitor's theory, it made sense. What about the other thing he said? The unsub is holding them somewhere, in a controlled environment. She reread the forensic reports. Every victim had ligature marks on their wrists and ankles from restraints, but they also had food residue, digestible food in their stomachs, which meant they were being fed during their captivity. And the strangest detail, none of the victims had defensive wounds. None, as if they had gone willingly to their deaths. And before he kills them, he talks to them. At length, Sarah closed her laptop. She didn't sleep until dawn. Her mind kept circling back to the old man. Who was he? Was he really an FBI agent or just a lonely old man with conspiracy theories? The next morning, Sarah went to the Academy's Human Resources Department. A young clerk named Jessica shuffled through files. Thomas Mercer, Jessica said, looking at the screen. Yeah, he's here. Night shift custodian for 5 years. His resume is pretty minimal. Previous employment listed as retired federal employee. No other details. Which federal agency? Sarah asked. Jessica shrugged. Not specified. Most retired federal employees don't give details. Privacy agreements, you know. Sarah bit her lip nervously. Where can I find him? He usually works 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., probably at home sleeping right now. Sarah thanked her and left, but her mind was troubled. Who was this old man, this Thomas Mercer, really? That evening at exactly 10 p.m., Sarah returned to the academy. She was officially off duty, but she couldn't help herself. She walked toward the custodial supply room. The door was ajar. A low light spilled from inside. When she entered, she found Thomas sitting at a small desk with a cup of coffee and an old notebook. He looked up, unsurprised. Detective Kim, he said calmly. I wasn't expecting you, but I'm not surprised either. Sarah closed the door behind her. I need to talk to you. I know, Thomas said. Sit down. Sarah hesitated, then sat in the plastic chair across from him. What you said yesterday, it's true. All our victims were abducted on Friday nights, all found Monday mornings, and they all have restraint marks, but no defensive wounds. As if he convinced them before harming them. Thomas finished her sentence. Yes, this is a classic behavioral signature. The unsub isn't just killing. He's trying to form a connection. Sarah leaned forward. Were you really in the FBI? Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. 25 years, Behavioral Analysis Unit. I profiled serial killers, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, BTK. I worked on all their cases. Not directly, but I analyzed their files. Sarah's breath caught. Then why are you here mopping floors? Thomas sighed with a bitter smile. Because 5 years ago, my wife died. Cancer. And suddenly, our big house, my big retirement pension, none of it meant anything. One night I found myself applying to work here at this academy. I wanted to stay active. I wanted to be around people, but not on the front lines anymore. Silence. Sarah swallowed. So what do you think about this case? Thomas opened his notebook. It was filled with pages of notes, handwritten diagrams, crime scene analyses, psychological profiles. Your unsub is between 35 and 45, he said. High functioning. Probably has a stable job, socially adept, charming enough to lure his victims, but internally he feels profound loneliness. He doesn't want to kill his victims. He wants to save them. Save them? Sarah repeated in shock. Yes, Thomas insisted. He feeds them, talks to them, restrains them, but doesn't hurt them. Then, on Sunday night, he kills them. Why? Because he realizes he can't save them. He accepts his failure, and then he moves on to the next attempt. Sarah shivered. That's disturbingly logical. And one more thing, Thomas continued, lowering his voice. Your unsub has connections to law enforcement, police, security, maybe social services. That's how he can convince his victims so easily. They trust him. The next morning, Sarah Kim took a risk. She walked into Chen's office and closed the door. Marcus, I need to talk to you, she said. Chen looked up, annoyed. Sarah, I'm reviewing a new lead right now. I spoke with Thomas Mercer last night, Sarah interrupted. Chen froze. The janitor? Seriously? Yes. And Marcus, he really was in the FBI 25 years, Behavioral Analysis Unit. Chen laughed. And he told you that? Of course he did, Sarah. He's a conspiracy theorist. He wants attention. No, Sarah insisted. I checked his HR file. It says, retired federal employee. And I saw his notes, Marcus. He's professional, knowledgeable. And he said, enough. Chen jumped to his feet, his face flushed. Sarah, are you seriously telling me that a janitor, an old, lonely janitor, is doing better crime analysis than me? No. This is ridiculous, and you're losing your professionalism. This man is manipulating you. Maybe he's just lonely. Maybe his memory is confused. But he is not an FBI agent. Sarah took a deep breath. Then let's verify him. Call the FBI archives. Confirm his background. Chen paused. Then he crossed his arms. Fine, I will. But let me tell you this, Sarah. If you're wrong, and this is just an old man's fantasy, you're off this team. Understood? Sarah nodded. Understood. 3 days later, an email arrived in Chen's office. It was from the FBI Records Division. Sarah was in the office when he opened it. Chen read the screen, his face growing darker and darker. Then, slowly, he turned to Sarah. What does it say? Sarah asked, holding her breath. Chen turned the email toward her. Sarah read, Subject, Thomas J. Mercer. Employment verification. Thomas James Mercer served with the Federal Bureau of Investigation from 1985 to 1995, 2010. Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU-2. Specialty, serial homicide profile analysis. Consulted on over 40 major cases during his career. Resigned in 2010 for personal reasons. Service record, exemplary. Note, Mr. Mercer holds one of the highest case resolution rates in BAU history. Sarah's heart pounded wildly. Marcus! Chen covered his face with his hands. There was a long silence. Then, slowly, he spoke. Okay, find him. Bring him here, now. An hour later, Thomas Mercer stood in the briefing room. But this time, he wasn't at the back wall. He was at the head of the table. Chen, Sarah, and 3 other detectives sat around him. The room was silent, tense, but this time filled with respect. Chen cleared his throat. Mr. Mercer, he said, his voice laced with shame and hesitation. I apologize. We treated you very badly, and I was wrong. Thomas nodded. Accepted, detective. But let's not waste time now. With your permission, I'd like to give you the complete profile of your unsub. Chen nodded. Please. Thomas stood, walked to the whiteboard, and picked up a marker. With old, confident movements, he began to write. Your unsub, he said, has these characteristics. Age, 35 to 45. Gender, male occupation, law enforcement, social services, or emergency response marital status, likely single or divorced psychological profile. High-functioning psychopath with empathic delusion. Motivation, rescue, believes he's saving victims from a bad world. Thomas turned to the board and wrote in large letters, Savior Complex. Your unsub selects victims he sees as vulnerable, in need of saving. What do they all have in common? They're all enrolled in social assistance programs. They've all experienced major traumas in their lives. Emily Sanders lost her parents in a car accident. David Cho was a former addict. The third victim, Jessica Lynn, had just escaped an abusive relationship. Sarah's eyes widened. How do you know this? Because I read your files, Thomas said calmly, every night after you leave. And I noticed something. All your victims were connected to one aid organization, the Riverside Community Help Center. Chen leaned forward. That's a non-profit. They provide mental health counseling, addiction treatment, employment assistance. Yes, Thomas confirmed, and I'd bet your unsub works there. Maybe a counselor, maybe a volunteer. But that's how he accesses his victims. He knows them, he learns their vulnerabilities, and then he tries to save them. Silence. Then Sarah whispered, "But why does he kill them?" Thomas turned to her, his eyes filled with deep sadness. Because he fails. He holds them for 2 days, talks to them, preaches to them about a new life. But in the end, he sees that they haven't changed. Maybe they cry, maybe they beg, and he decides they're too broken to save. So he frees them from their suffering. The room was ice cold. Chen swallowed. Then, our suspect pool is very small. How many employees work at the Riverside Community Help Center? About 30, Sarah answered, checking her phone. But if we count volunteers, it goes up to 50. Thomas nodded. And if your unsub has a law enforcement background, he'll show up in a database. He was police or military before. Maybe he resigned. Maybe he experienced trauma. Chen jumped to his feet. I'm requesting leave records and prior employment records immediately. Sarah, you and I are going to that center tomorrow morning. The next morning, at 7 a.m., Chen, Sarah, and Thomas got into an unmarked car and drove to the Riverside Community Help Center. Thomas hadn't been invited, but Chen insisted. You created the profile, he'd said. You should see this through. The center was in a low brick building in one of the city's outer neighborhoods. Inside it was clean but worn, cheap plastic chairs, faded posters, a place kept alive by volunteer spirit. The woman at reception, Miss Dolores, greeted them with a smile. Can I help you? Chen showed his badge. Police detective. We need to see your personnel list. Dolores's smile faded. Of course. One moment. A few minutes later, the director arrived. Margaret Hale, a middle-aged, tired-looking woman. Detective, is there a problem? Just a routine investigation, Chen lied. We need to look at your personnel records, specifically anyone with a background in law enforcement. Margaret frowned. That's a very specific request. Yes, Chen said, his voice hard. It's urgent. Margaret led them to a small office and opened a file cabinet. We currently have 12 full-time employees and 18 volunteers, she said. Those with law enforcement backgrounds. Let me see. She flipped through several pages, then stopped. Ah, yes, 2 people. First, Jake Morrison, former police officer, early retirement due to knee injury. Now a substance abuse counselor here. Sarah and Chen exchanged glances. And the second? Sarah asked. Daniel Whitmore, Margaret read, former emergency responder paramedic, resigned 6 years ago, now does trauma counseling here. Thomas leaned forward. What was Daniel Whitmore's reason for resigning? Margaret examined the file. Apparently, emotional burnout during a case. A family died in a traffic accident. He couldn't save them all. A little girl died in his arms. After that, he couldn't work on an ambulance again. The room went silent. Thomas slowly nodded. Him. Daniel Whitmore. He's our unsub. Chen turned to him. How do you know? Because, Thomas explained, trauma is his trigger. He lost someone, a child, and now he's trying to replace his lost object. Every victim is a reflection of that little girl. If he can't save them, he fails again. Chen grabbed his radio. All units, we have a suspect, Daniel Whitmore. Works at Riverside Community Help Center. Locate and place under surveillance immediately. May be armed and dangerous. An hour later, the tactical team apprehended Daniel Whitmore at his home. In his basement, there was a small room. Chains, restraints, a bed, a table, On the walls were photographs of his victims, framed, carefully arranged. Beneath them, notes. I tried to save Emily, but she wouldn't listen. David was strong, but not enough. Daniel Whitmore was 38 years old, calm and well-groomed. When arrested, he didn't resist. He only said, "I tried to save them. I really tried." 2 days later, a special ceremony was held at the Riverside Police Academy. The press was there, cameras, officials. The police chief stood at the podium and made a statement. The resolution of this case was the result of teamwork. But I especially want to thank one person, Thomas J. Mercer, a man who served 25 years in the FBI, now a retired hero. Without Mr. Mercer's knowledge, experience, and humility, this killer would still be out there, and more lives would have been lost. Applause echoed through the hall. Thomas sat quietly in the back row, his gray custodial uniform still on. They called him to the stage. Slowly, he stood up and walked forward. As he approached the podium, Detective Marcus Chen stepped forward. Chen's face was red, his eyes filled with remorse. He moved to the microphone. "Mr. Mercer," he said, his voice breaking, I remember how I treated you. I humiliated you. I belittled you. And I disgraced you in front of my team. An apology isn't enough." The room was silent. Chen stood before Thomas and extended his hand. But Thomas didn't shake it. Instead, he gently touched Chen's shoulder. "Marcus," Thomas said, his voice soft, "you're a good detective. Just young and ambitious. I was the same at your age. But the most important thing you need to learn is this. Knowledge always comes from unexpected places. Sometimes from a janitor, sometimes from a man on the street, sometimes from someone forgotten." Chen bowed his head. All the detectives around him, Sarah Kim, Ryan Foster, and the others, stood and applauded Thomas. This time, the applause was genuine, respectful. After the ceremony, the press broadcast Thomas's story on regional news. Headlines read, "FBI legend catches serial killer while working as janitor." Thomas's former FBI colleagues called, congratulated him, reminisced about old days. But Thomas was uncomfortable with all the attention. One night, Sarah Kim found him in the academy's small room. He was at his notebook again, with a cup of coffee. "Thomas," Sarah stood in the doorway, "can I talk to you?" "Of course, Detective." Thomas looked up and smiled. "Always." Sarah entered and sat down. "I want to ask you something. Why? Why do you keep working here? I mean, everyone knows who you are now. The FBI could call you back. You could consult, write books, but you're still here, holding a mop." Thomas was silent for a long time. Then he took a deep breath. "Because, Sarah," he said, "I chased monsters for 25 years. Every day I entered the dark corners of my mind, and it consumed me. When I lost my wife, I lost myself too. But when I came here, I found purpose, simple purpose, clean floors, an orderly life. And you know what? I'm happy." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But you could do so much more." "Maybe," Thomas nodded. "But sometimes more isn't necessary. Sometimes just being enough is enough." There was silence for a while. Then Sarah smiled. "Well, will you at least keep teaching us? I mean, officially. Chen wants to start a program called the Mercer Behavioral Analysis Seminar for all the young detectives at the academy." Thomas's face showed surprise but happiness. "Really?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "And this time, we'll listen. I promise." Thomas smiled, this time a wide, genuine smile. "Then I accept." 3 weeks later, the first seminar was held. 20 young detectives sat in a classroom with notebooks. At the front, standing before the whiteboard, was Thomas Mercer. He was no longer wearing the gray uniform. He had on a simple but clean suit. "Good morning," Thomas said. "My name is Thomas Mercer, and I'm here to teach you something they don't teach in textbooks: empathy." A detective raised his hand. "But sir, should we use empathy to catch criminals?" Thomas nodded. "No, You should use understanding to catch criminals, and understanding comes from empathy. You can't catch someone without understanding them. Think, feel, analyze, but never, never dismiss. The room was silent. Everyone listened carefully. Thomas continued. When I was in the FBI, my biggest mistake was this: trying to keep myself distant from the victims. I wanted to be professional. But you know what? My best solutions came when I put myself in the victim's place, when I felt their fear, when I understood their hopelessness. That's when I could see the perpetrator. Sarah Kim sat in the back row taking notes. Next to her sat Ryan Foster, once arrogant, now humbled. Foster whispered, "This man is a real legend." Sarah smiled. "Yes, and we almost lost him." Months later, on a cold December evening, Marcus Chen stood in front of a small restaurant. Inside, at a small table, sat Thomas Mercer. Chen entered and approached the table. "Mr. Mercer," Chen stopped. "Am I disturbing you?" Thomas looked up and smiled. "Not at all, Detective." "Sit down." Chen sat. For a while, neither spoke. Then Chen took a deep breath. "I want to tell you something. Since that day, I've wondered how you're so at peace with yourself. I mean, you were a legend, and then you gave it all up, started mopping floors, and you were happy. How?" Thomas took a sip of his coffee. "Because Marcus," he said, "I'm no longer trying to prove anything. When I was young, I wanted to be the best, fastest case resolution rate, most recognition, but in the end, none of that mattered. What matters is, every day, helping someone, even if it's small, even if it's simple." Chen nodded. "You've taught me so much, not just how to solve crimes, but how to be a person." Thomas touched his shoulder. "You're a good detective, Marcus, and in time you'll become a great leader. Just remember, the greatest power isn't in arrogance, it's in humility." Chen wiped his eyes. "Thank you, sir." 2 years passed. Thomas Mercer was now the chief consultant at the Riverside Police Academy. He still lived a simple life, in a small apartment taking morning walks, reading every evening. But he was no longer invisible. Every new detective attended the Mercer seminar. Every major case requested his consultation, and every young police officer looked at him like a hero. But Thomas never changed. He remained humble. He remained kind. And still, every night at the academy, he would stop at the custodial room door and say, "Good evening," to the young custodian working inside, offering him a cup of coffee. Because Thomas Mercer knew, heroes don't wear uniforms. Heroes live quietly. And true wisdom multiplies when shared. One day, when Sarah Kim returned to the academy for her retirement ceremony, she found Thomas. He was now 75 years old, but his eyes were still sharp, his mind still keen. "Thomas," Sarah smiled. "Still here?" "Of course," Thomas laughed. "Where else would I go?" Sarah handed him something, his old, worn notebook. "I wanted to return this to you. It changed everything for me." Thomas took the notebook and flipped through the pages. The notes inside, analyses of dozens of cases, profiles, theories, were all still there. "This," Thomas said, "is not just a notebook. This is a legacy, and you're the one to continue it." Sarah nodded, her eyes filling. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." Thomas hugged her. "No, Sarah, thank you for giving me a second chance, for reminding me I wasn't forgotten." And so Thomas Mercer's story ended, but his legacy continued. Every young detective knew his name. Every police academy taught his methods, but most importantly, everyone had learned this: true heroes live quietly, true wisdom grows when shared, and true respect is earned through actions, not uniforms. Thomas Mercer was a janitor, but he was also a legend, and his story would be told for generations, not just because he solved a case, but because he reminded everyone of the power of humility, patience, and empathy.